Regional Planning Commission for Thursday, September the 8th at 6:30. And customarily, as we started off, we'll start off with the pledge, and I'll ask Mr. Davis if you'll lead us in the pledge, please. Thank you, Mr. Davis, and welcome back. We certainly appreciate you being here tonight. Sir, I'll now come to you for the roll call and determination of quorum.
Mr. Peterman?
Present.
Mr. Servon?
Present.
Mrs. Karcher?
Here.
Mr. Galvary?
Here.
Mr. Mills? Mr. Mills? Mr. Davis?
Here.
Mr. Jester?
Here.
So you have 7 present. You do have a quorum.
Thank you very much. On our agenda, sir, before we go ahead and pass it, isn't the first one in new business, isn't that the one we took off last week?
Yes.
So the agenda that we have in front of us will be changed with that change. That number 1 will not be acted on tonight because it was removed last week because there's no objections.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, Mr. Davis.
could we do, just for a point of order, have a moment of silence for 9/11 that's approaching real soon? And I would request that we have a moment of silence for those who lost their lives 9/11. Amen.
Thank you, sir. A day we'll never forget. As I said, now we're going to the agenda that's in front of you, and there is a change under new business. Number 1 is no longer on the agenda. So with that change and deletion from it, I'd ask for a motion to approve.
Motion to approve with that one elimination.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Please call the commission.
Mr. Peterman?
Yes, super.
Mr. Servon?
Yes to approve.
Mrs. Karcher?
Yes.
Mr. Galvary?
Yes to approve.
Mr. Mills?
Yes to approve.
Mr. Davis?
Yes to approve.
Mr. Jester?
Yes.
So you have 7 ayes in favor of approving the amended agenda for tonight's meeting.
In your packet, you've had the minutes from July 14th, 2022. If there's no corrections or any additions or deletions, I would ask for a motion to approve those minutes.
So move.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Please call the commission.
Mr. Peterman?
Yes to approve.
Mr. Servon?
Yes to approve.
Mrs. Karcher?
Yes.
Mr. Galvary?
Yes to approve.
Mr. Mills?
Yes to approve.
Mr. Davis?
Yes to approve.
Mr. Jester?
Yes to approve.
So you have 7 ayes in favor of approving the minutes of July 14th.
Thank you once again. On the next thing on the agenda sheet, you see levy court action and commission recommendations. They modified a little bit, but if you have any questions, please contact staff for anything that you might have questions on that. Old business. A couple months ago, we had the elections, and I thank you all for supporting me as chairperson. That one's done, but we now have before us the election for vice chair. I think we have, I have paperwork here where we have 2 nominations for vice chairman. We have Mr. Davis and Mr. Galvary. I assume we'll get ready. Is there any more nominations?
No, but there's a Is it appropriate time to decline from the nomination?
Yes, you can remove your name if you'd like.
I'd like to remove my name. I'm honored to have been nominated, but I'd like to wait a while. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn. Well, with the removal of that name, if there's no other nominations, then Mr. Davis, congratulations on a vice chair position. Party to happen later, I guess. Now we'll go down into new business. First under new business is actually the number 2 on the agenda tonight, CS-22-04, American Holly Solar Farm, request for a conditional use with site plan approval of a solar facility, public utility located outside the growth zone overlay district. They did a great presentation last week. I guess I can't talk tonight. And I would like to ask the engineer or the gentleman I talked to, is it Mr. Tam? Can you come to the mic? I do have a question. I don't know if any other commissioners do, but I do have one question that I was contacted by a couple of my constituents. They want to know, when these panels are purchased, are they made in the USA or they come from China like everything else does?
The solar panels, the current contract that we have, those panels are assembled in Southeast Asia. They are not assembled in China. Which is commonplace for about 78 to 80% of all the solar panels that are installed in the U.S. today.
Yeah, that was, I actually got about a half dozen calls and they were talking about the different ones we have up tonight. So I assume that's for all three. Thank you for your answer. Does any other commissioners have any questions?
I have a comment.
Mr. Mills? Not with him? You don't need him to the mic? Oh, stay up there, okay.
Usually, when these applications come up, I do try to go visit some of the applicants. Saturday, I started to go visit this farm here of Mr. Parnell's, and I didn't get there. My telephone rang, and it was Mr. Killen, the one that tills the farm. And he spoke very highly of you people and Mr. Parnell and how you handled the dealing with Mr. Parnell and what Mr. Parnell wanted. He says, you people were the greatest. Anytime you got a farm, you got higher production of land in parts of it and lower production parts of it in another. And you guys were very accepting to use the land that was not as productive as the other part, the front part of the farm. And you were very agriculture minded, and that even the front of the farm is irrigated, am I right? And
Correct.
you did everything you could to work this system so that the irrigation system would not be interrupted. And he told me that he really appreciated that. And I think that's the whole goal of what we have tried to deal with since this all started a few years ago, that we're trying to save the high productive farmland, and because there's so much land that's unproductive that can be used for for these systems. And Mr. Killen wanted to say thank you guys for what you did.
Thank you. Appreciate that comment.
Thank you, Mr. Mills. Any other questions?
I do.
If not, yeah, Mr. Kirby?
Yes. There's only one item on this application that still concerns me just a tad. Otherwise, I'm perfectly comfortable with it, and all three of them, actually. It gets down to the ground cover mix. I can't recall whether we put that one totally to rest last week, but are you guys open to having some sort of clover or some sort of a pollinator mix in your ground cover, either in the beginning stage or at a later stage, a year or so afterwards?
We like to use more of a traditional, grass, mix that will establish quickly, and won't require as much maintenance and watering in order for it to establish and grow. So that's why we typically like to use a similar seed mix to what's used by the Department of Transportation, for example. The pollinators oftentimes require a lot more, care in order for them to establish, and to ensure that the beauty of the site, in order for it to, not result in dead pollinator product. We like to use just a traditional seed mix, grass seed mix for the ground cover.
What about just clover, which you can broadcast into any seed mix and it will take root and grows rather fast. It can be delegated depending on the species in terms of its height.
Do we know if there's clover in our existing seed mix?
Please give your name first.
Alex Schmidt, Century Engineering. We typically would use these seed mixes that are recommended by DENREC. Those of you who are familiar with the site plan process, you know that DENREC has a sediment and stormwater approval. They have their own standards of seed mixes that they've vetted for Delaware that are known to be successful in Delaware soil, and also to use mostly native seeds in Delaware. There's not clover in those seed mixes. I'm sure we could talk about it and see if it's been successful elsewhere. We'd have to look like, has the shading caused the clover to die, which could become an erosion issue, or are there any other factors we'd have to be aware of? I think we're open to everything, but the standard that we're looking at right now is to use the DENREC approved seed mixes.
Does that answer you, Glenn?
Not totally.
Add to it.
Denise, go ahead.
Well, and I am the one who picked up last week on the one picture that you had of a solar facility, and because I feel the same way about pollinators, and that picture obviously was full of pollinator-type plants. So I made a mistake, and I made an assumption, but then again, I got smart and asked you, and that's how we found out about this grass mixture rather than pollinators. It would seem to me, having fought clover in my backyard, because I had kids that I was afraid we'd get, when they're little, get stung, but the way it grows, I can't imagine that it's a difficult thing to establish, to my knowledge, and there's so many different types, just like there are of grasses, that to me it would seem there would be less work because it might grow to a certain height and you don't have to even mow at all. And it's just going to, correct me, it dies off and then it comes back again because the roots are well established. So maybe Mr. Govery can say something
Well,
about that.
I was a beekeeper for a number of years, and the property that I kept my hives on is actually in a floodplain. We routinely got flooded with a salt brackish type of water. Sometimes it was wet for months on end. A lot of shade from the trees that were in and around the area, and then there were areas where there was a lot of sun. The clover was great because it actually held the ground together, and it was very tolerant to these various conditions, and the bees liked it. So that's why I threw out clover, because it seemed to be the easiest way to mix it in with what you were normally thinking of doing, and would look very much the same other than a flower. So I'm just trying to I'm trying to get myself to yes for you, but that's the stumbling block I'm having. Is there any give on this at all?
So I don't think we have any objection to clover. I just don't want to blanket say we'll do that without knowing for sure it'll work. So I think our
So
feeling
if it
is that
worked,
it's
could we
important.
say if it worked?
If it works, then I think we would certainly be open to using it.
Okay.
Well, I think you'll probably be here with more of these coming in the later years. It would certainly be a good thing to do and put it in one of these farms and give pictures of us as you come along, say, hey, wait a minute, this does work. So, as we progress through this, solar's all new to us too, and the things that we want are also new. So who wants to say something? Mr. Servon, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I know other states have instituted that requirement that pollinators be planted. I don't see any reason why we couldn't do it or you couldn't do it. We could require you to do it. Even if it's a mixture and you're still going to have cover. I know your concern is primarily erosion control, but I think it's time to research a little bit more into other purposes, I guess, of the ground cover, something that would benefit the area, farmers and such. I know. I'd be really disappointed if you guys weren't able to do that.
If you're coming up, sir, give us your name at the mic, please.
Yes, how are you? Jeff Matron with EDF. We hear your comments about it. It is something we all are very interested in. In fact, there are some of our GSP projects or larger projects that we do. We actually have beehives at this site. We give honey, we sell it out. These are test cases at this point, and there's also other considerations that I know I don't particularly like talking about. I know most people don't like hearing about, but there are economic and availability constraints with using particular types of seeding. if we can find it at the right price and the right availability, then we have no issues doing such things. It's just when these are very realistic concerns that we have. As we mentioned at the hearing last week, these are very tight budgets that we have for these projects because they all are much smaller projects. We don't have the economies of scale to make up the pricing with this. But they are things that we consider, and if we do have the availability, if we can fit them into the budget, then we have no problem doing that. It's just that's not always the case. We haven't really evaluated it with the supply chain issues that we've been seeing the past year or two. I mean, it's been very difficult just to find the basics at a reasonable price and within a reasonable time frame. But those are also realistic concerns that we have. It's not that we're opposed to the idea. I mean, I think we would all welcome it if we can do it effectively. There just are serious concerns when we commit to particular types of pollinators that it might not be the case that we can do that. But we do hear your concerns, and we are receptive of it. It's just how we word that into a condition or something, it can be very difficult at times because we have had projects we just weren't able to get those particular seeds that were in the condition. So that's a very real concern that we have. It's not that we're opposed to it, it's just how it's worded and what happens if we're not able to is a concern that we have.
Okay, thank you for your comments, and we appreciate your trying. Glenn, I guess you're okay with their answer?
Well, it's the wording, so it's how it's worded, and I agree, it is how it's worded, and I think it should be worded that it's fair to the points that they brought up, because they are legitimate concerns, but not in such a way that it can be discarded or dismissed or ignored at the same time. So I'm not quite sure what that, it's probably, we have already in there that, about perennial vegetation ground cover, we could put something that's conducive to, or I don't know if there's a language that you guys find acceptable that gives you the flexibility that you're looking for, but at the same time kind of appeases what we're looking for as well.
If I could make a suggestion, I would say that you put something in there with consideration to pollinators and then leave it to Sarah and her staff when they approve the plans to determine whether sufficient consideration has been given.
With consideration to pollinators, that I can work with that.
Okay, once again, we thank you for your time. Any more concerns or questions from the commissioners? If not, I would entertain a motion, and with the understanding, Sarah, that with this pollinators being put in there, I think you're going to have to work on the wording on what we're looking for.
The wording has got to be in the motion. We can't create it after the fact.
I can do this.
Okay, we can do that. Mr.
Yes.
Gervais, you got to do the first one?
I'll do the first one.
Okay, thank you, sir.
We got an hour here at this. This will be on the American Holly Farm, solar farm, correct?
That's correct.
All right, so I move that the Regional Planning Commission recommend conditional approval of the application CS-22-04, a conditional use site plan for a public utility use located outside of the growth zone overlay district. This is based on Exhibit A, staff recommendation report dated September 1, 2022, Exhibit B, public hearing testimony dated September 1, 2022, and the findings of fact that A, the subject site is zoned AC, agricultural conservation, and subheading 205-48 and 205-329 permit public utilities and public utility uses as conditional use. B, the location is appropriate and not in conflict with the comprehensive plan. C, the public health, safety, and general welfare will not be adversely affected. Pursuant to Chapters 187 and 205 of the Kent County Code and pursuant to 9 Delaware C, Subchapter 4802 and 4811, the Commission has reviewed the application and the September 1, 2022 staff recommendation report, and furthermore, as part of this approval, the applicant shall comply with all staff and agency requirements as described in the September 1, 2022 staff recommendation report. A, the waiver from subchapter 187-60 requiring frontage sidewalk is granted. B, the waiver from subchapter 187-74D requiring tree planting in non-woodlands is granted. C, the waiver from subchapter 187-79A requiring visual screening against residential use is granted. D, 2 rows of trees as required by subchapter 205-397.9.E to complete the buffer around the facility is recommended rather than relying upon the existing trees not located on the subject site. Note, this is not shown in the plan and is disputed by the applicant. E, there shall be no artificial lighting on site. F, the perimeter fence shall be 7 feet in height. G, if topsoil is removed for improvement, it shall remain on site. H, non-invasive perennial vegetation ground cover with consideration to pollinators must be maintained or established in all areas containing solar array and in required setbacks to prevent erosion and management runoff. A seed mix shall be used to promote the growth of a ground cover that is favorable to future use of the land by animals. The height of the vegetation growth shall be maintained as to reduce the possibility of airborne spreading of weeds and seeds transmitted to other adjacent lands. I, a soils study establishing the presence of any contaminant shall be completed prior to the construction and every 5 years thereafter. Surface soil samples shall be collected from the first 6 inches of soil. 1 composite sample shall be collected every 5 acres of SEF footprint. The composite sample should be a maximum of 10 aliquots collected from evenly spaced locations throughout the 5-acre footprint. The baseline sample shall be collected prior to the start of the SEF construction. The composite sample shall be analyzed for the primary component of the installed solar panels via prevailing EPA methods for inorganic compounds. A letter report of findings shall be submitted within 45 days from receipt of the laboratory results to the county and shall include a summary table showing current and past results and the original certified laboratory results. A sketch showing the sample location shall be provided with a letter report. The full report shall be kept on file by the applicant and available for review by the county. If the contaminant level appears to exceed the baseline, the county will forward the report to DENREC to determine the appropriate mitigation measures. If the 5-year and 10-year tests do not show material increase in the metal constituents tested, then testing intervals may be extended to every 10 years. J, the applicant is proposing signage not to exceed 6 square feet, identifying the operator. Its contact numbers and emergency contact information shall be posted at the entrance to the facility on the surrounding site fence. K, if the solar utility does not produce energy for a continuous period of 1 year or more, it shall be presumed to have been abandoned. The applicant shall request a good clause exemption that may not be unreasonably withheld so long as all real estate and personal property taxes are in good standing. If the solar utility is abandoned without obtaining a good cause exemption, it must be decommissioned and removed within 180 days. Decommissioning must consist of L, physical removal of all solar photovoltaic facilities, structures, equipment, security barriers, and transmission lines from the site. M, recycling or disposal of all solid hazardous waste in accordance with local, state, and federal regulations. N, stabilization or revegetation of the site is necessary to minimize erosion. The planning director shall be authorized to allow the owner to operate to leave landscaping or designated below-grade foundations in place in order to minimize erosion and disruption to vegetation. The applicant shall submit a decommissioning plan outlining the anticipated means and cost of removing the solar facility. The decommissioning plan shall ensure that all owner or operated property removes the equipment and facilities upon end of the project life or after their useful life. The plan shall include provisions for the removal of all structures and foundations, the removal of all electrical transmission components, and the restoration of soil and vegetation and/or agriculture. In addition to the decommissioning plan, the owner-operator shall provide a present-day decommissioning cost estimate and identify the parties responsible for decommissioning. P, prior to final approval, prior to final plan approval, the operator or property owner shall provide a bond, surety, letter of credit, or other financial assurances in the form of amount acceptable to the Department of Planning Services to secure payment of 100% of the anticipated cost of removal of all associated site improvements and restoration of the site to its pre-developed condition. The final assurance shall remain in full force and effect as long as the solar facility remains in place. The financial assurance shall be reviewed and renewed every 5 years to ensure the amount reflects the current market. Q, the final plan must be approved within 24 months of preliminary plan approval, and construction shall commence within 18 months of final plan approval. R, failure to comply with the conditions of approval or applicable regulations can result in the revoking of any permit issued for this continual use and the revocation of the conditional use by itself.
Thank you, Mr. Gervais. I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion. I have a second. Sarah, call the commission.
Mr. Peterman?
Yes to approve.
Mr. Servan?
Yes.
Mrs. Karcher?
Yes.
Mr. Galvary?
Yes to approve.
Mr. Mills?
Yes to approve.
Mr. Davis?
Yes to promotion.
Mr. Jester?
Yes for all the conditions.
So you have 7 yeas in favor of recommending conditional approval of application CS 2204.
Thank you, commissioners, and good luck with that project. Next on the agenda tonight is CS-22-05, Ladybug Solar Farm. Requests conditional use with site plan approval of a solar facility, public utility located outside the growth zone overlay district. As with the other one, they give us great answers and all like that. And through previous conversations that we talked about with the pollinators, that's probably going to go on this one too. As Mr. Garvey has talked about, would you like to comment on that, sir?
Yes, Jeff Matron with ADF. I agree with the terms.
Thank you very much. Is there any other questions for these about this farm? If not, then I'll ask Denise, would you mind reading the motion, please?
Sure. First, though, Mr. Garvey gets a lifesaver for that.
It's my finger holding the button that hurts.
Here, you have two of them. I move that the Regional Planning Commission recommend conditional approval of application CS-22-05, a conditional use site plan for a public utility use located outside the growth zone overlay district. This is based on Exhibit A, staff recommendation report dated September 1, 2022, Exhibit B, public hearing testimony dated September 1, 2022, and the findings of fact that A, the subject site is zoned AR, agricultural residential, and subchapters 205 to 64 and 205 to 329 permit public utilities and public utility uses as a conditional use. B, the location is appropriate and not in conflict with the comprehensive plan. And C, the public health, safety, and general welfare will not be adversely affected. Pursuant to Chapters 187 and 205 of the Kent County Code and pursuant to 9 Delaware chapters and subchapter 4802 and 4811, the Commission has reviewed the application and the September 1, 2022 staff recommendation report, and furthermore, as part of this approval, the applicant shall comply with all staff and agency requirements as described in the September 1, 2022 staff recommendation report. A, the waiver from subchapter 187-60 requiring frontage sidewalk is granted. B, the waiver from 187-74D requiring tree planting in non-woodlands is granted. C, there shall be no artificial lighting on site. D, the perimeter fence shall be 7 feet in height. And E, if topsoil is removed for improvements, it shall remain on the site. F, non-invasive perennial vegetative ground cover with consideration to pollinators such as clover must be maintained or established in all areas containing solar arrays and in required setbacks to prevent erosion and manage runoff. A seed mix shall be used to promote the growth of a ground cover that is favorable to future use of the land by animals. The height of the vegetation growth shall be maintained as to reduce the possibility of the airborne spreading of weeds and seeds transmitted to the other adjacent lands. G, a soil study establishing the presence of any contaminants shall be completed prior to construction and every 5 years thereafter. Surface soil samples shall be collected from the first 6 inches of soil. One composite sample should be collected every 5 acres of SEF footprint. The composite sample should be a maximum of 10 aliquots collected for every space location throughout the 5-acre footprint. A baseline sample shall be collected prior to the start of the SEF construction, and the composite sample should be analyzed for the primary component of the installed solar panel via the prevailing EPA method for inorganic compounds. A letter report of findings shall be submitted within 45 days from receipt of the laboratory results to the county and shall include a summary table showing current and past results and the original certified laboratory results. A sketch showing the sample location should be provided with the letter report. The full report shall be kept on file by the applicant and available for review by the county. If contaminant levels appear to exceed the baseline, the county will forward the report to DNREC to determine appropriate mitigation measures. If the 5-year and 10-year tests do not show material increase in the metal constituents tested, then testing interval may be extended to every 10 years. H, the applicant is proposing signage not to exceed 6 square feet, identifying the operator, its contact numbers, and emergency contact information to be posted at the entrance to the facility on the surrounding site fence. I, if solar utility does not produce energy for a continuous period of 1 year or more, it shall be presumed to have been abandoned. The applicant may request a good cause exemption that may not be unreasonably withheld so long as all real estate and personal property taxes are in good standing. If the solar utility is abandoned without obtaining a good cause exemption, it must be decommissioned and removed within 180 days. Decommissioning must consist of J, physical removal of all solar photovoltaic facilities, structures, equipment, security barriers, and transmission lines from the site. Recycling or disposal of all solid and hazardous waste in accordance with local, state, and federal regulations. Stabilization or revegetation of the site as necessary to minimize erosion. The planning director shall be authorized to allow the owner or operator to leave landscaping or designated below-ground foundations in place in order to minimize erosion and disruption to vegetation. The applicant shall submit a decommissioning plan outlining the anticipated means and costs of removing the solar facility. The decommissioning plan shall ensure that the owner or operator properly removes the equipment and facilities upon the end of the project life or after their useful life. The plan shall include provisions for the removal of all structures and foundations, the removal of all electrical transmission components, and the restoration of soil and vegetation and/or agriculture. In addition to a decommissioning plan, the owner-operator shall provide a present-day decommissioning cost estimate and identify the parties responsible for decommissioning. And prior to final plan approval, the operator or property owner shall provide a bond, surety letter or of credit or other financial assurance in a form and amount acceptable to the Department of Planning Services to secure payment of 100% of the anticipated cost of removal of all associated site improvements and restoration of the site to its pre-development condition. The financial assurance shall remain in full force and effect as long as the solar facility remains in place. The final assurance shall be reviewed and renewed every 5 years to ensure the amount reflects the current market. O, the final plan must be approved within 24 months of preliminary plan approval, and construction shall commence within 18 months of final plan approval. And P, the failure to comply with the conditions of approval or applicable regulations can result in a revocation of any permits issued for this conditional use and a revocation of the conditional use itself.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Sarah, call the commission.
Mr. Peterman?
Yes to approve.
Mr. Servon?
Yes to approve.
Mrs. Karcher?
Yes, for the motion.
Mr. Galvary?
Yes to approve.
Mr. Mills?
Yes to approve.
Mr. Davis?
Yes to approve.
Mr. Jester?
Yes, for all reasons in the motion.
So we have 7 yeas in favor of recommending conditional approval of the application CS 2205.
Congratulations and good luck with that project. Next on the agenda tonight is CS-22-06, Gray Fox Solar Farm. Request conditional use with site plan approval of a solar facility, public utility, located outside the growth zone overlay district. As we mentioned in the previous ones, and I don't know if you want to come to the mic again about the pollinators, but we want to make sure that we have it on this one also. And
Agree with the language.
thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Nice speech. I like those kind of speeches. I am now looking for a motion. Someone here going to read the motion? You do have the lifesaver, Denise, so. So, are you going to read the motion for us, please? Thank you very much.
If my fingers can handle it. I move that the Regional Planning Commission recommend conditional approval of application CS 22-06, a conditional use site plan for a public utility use located outside the growth zone overlay district. And this is based on Exhibit A, staff recommendation report dated September 1, 2022. Exhibit B, public hearing testimony dated September 1, 2022. And the findings of facts that A, the subject site is zoned AR, agricultural residential, and subchapters 205 to 64 and 205 to 329 permit public utilities and public utility uses as a conditional use. B, the location is appropriate, not in conflict with the comprehensive plan. And C, the public safety and general welfare will not be adversely affected. Pursuant to chapters 187 and 205 of the Kent County Code and pursuant to 9 Delaware chapter 4802 and 4811, the Commission has reviewed the application in the September 1, 2022 staff recommendation report, and furthermore, as part of the approval, the applicant shall comply with all staff and agency requirements as described in the September 1, 2022 staff recommendation report. A, the waiver from subchapter 185-74D requiring tree planting in non-woodlands is granted. B, there shall be no artificial lighting on site. C, the perimeter fence shall be 7 feet in height. D, if topsoil is removed for improvements, it shall remain on the site. E, non-invasive perennial vegetative ground cover must be maintained or established in all areas containing solar arrays, and the ground cover shall, there should be consideration to pollinators such as clover. And in required setbacks, it also should be in required setbacks to prevent erosion and manage runoff. A seed mix shall be used to promote the growth of a ground cover that is favorable to future use of the land by animals. The height of the vegetation growth shall be maintained as to reduce the possibility of the airborne spreading of weeds and seeds transmitted to other adjacent lands. F, a soil study establishing the presence of any contaminants shall be completed prior to construction and every 5 years thereafter. Surface soil samples shall be collected from the first 6 inches of soil. 1 composite sample should be collected every 5 acres of the SEF footprint. The composite sample should be a maximum of 10 aliquots collected from evenly spaced locations throughout the 5-acre footprint. A baseline sample shall be collected prior to the start of the SEF construction. The composite sample should be analyzed for the primary component of the installed solar panel via the prevailing EPA method for inorganic compounds. A letter report of findings shall be submitted within 45 days from receipt of the laboratory results to the county and shall include a summary table showing current and past results as well as the original certified laboratory results. A sketch showing the sample location should be provided with the letter report. The full report shall be kept on file by the applicant and available for review by the county. If contaminant levels appear to exceed the baseline, the county will forward the report to DENREC to determine appropriate mitigation measures. If the 5-year and 10-year tests do not show material increase in the metal constituents tested, then testing intervals may be extended to every 10 years. G, the applicant is proposing signage not to exceed 6 square feet, identifying the operator, its contact numbers, and emergency contact information to be posted at the entrance to the facility on the surrounding site fence. H, if the solar utility does not produce energy for a continuous period of 1 year or more, it shall be presumed to have been abandoned. The applicant may request a good cause exemption that may not be unreasonably withheld, so long as all real estate and personal property taxes are in good standing. If the solar facility is abandoned without obtaining a good cause exemption, it must be decommissioned and removed within 180 days. Decommissioning must consist of I, physical removal of all solar photovoltaic facilities, structures, equipment, security barriers, and transmission lines from the site. J, recycling of or disposal of all solid and hazardous waste in accordance with the local, state, and federal regulations. K, stabilization or revegetation of the site as necessary to minimize erosion. The planning director shall be authorized to allow the owner or operator to leave landscaping or designated below-grade foundations in place in order to minimize erosion and disruption to vegetation. L, the applicant shall submit a decommissioning plan outlining the anticipated means and costs of removing the solar facility. This decommissioning plan shall ensure that the owner or operator properly removes the equipment and facilities upon the end of the project life or after their useful life. The plan shall include provisions for the removal of all structures and foundation, the removal of all electrical transmission components, and the restoration of soil and vegetation and/or agriculture. In addition to a decommissioning plan, the owner-operator shall provide a present-day decommissioning cost estimate and identify the parties responsible for decommissioning. Prior to final plan approval, the operator or property owner shall provide a bond, surety, letter of credit, or other financial assurance in a form and amount acceptable to the Department of Planning Services to secure payment of 100% of the anticipated costs of removal of all associated site improvements and restoration of the site to its pre-development condition. The financial assurance shall remain in force and effect as long as the solar facility remains in place. The financial assurance shall be reviewed and renewed every 5 years to ensure the amount reflects the current market. And the final plan must be approved within 24 months of preliminary plan approval, and construction shall commence within 18 months of final plan approval. And O, failure to comply with the conditions of approval or applicable regulations can result in a revocation of any permits issued for this conditional use and a revocation of the conditional use itself.
Thank you, Denise. I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Sarah, call the commission.
Mr. Peterman?
Yes to approve.
Mr. Servon?
Yes to approve.
Mrs. Karcher?
Yes to approve, and let me just give a warning to anyone that has to say that, read that much, that you shouldn't have a lifesaver in the side of your mouth.
Mr. Galvery?
Yes to approve.
Mr. Mills?
Yes to approve.
Mr. Davis?
Yes to approve.
Mr. Jester?
Yes to approve.
So you have 7 yeas in favor of recommending conditional approval of application CS 2206.
Once again, we thank you, and thank you for your dedication for what you're doing, and good luck with your project. Next, included in our packet tonight, I'd like to ask Sarah to go over a little bit with this Kent County zoning district and growth zone thing that she has developed for us. As we get into these 2 solar ordinance definitions that we're going to redefine or possibly redefine. So would you like to explain, Sarah, how this particular one works? And is there something on here that represents in each district how much is already built there?
if we can actually get back to the agenda, the first ordinance just changes the definition of community solar. So if we could focus on that one first, and we can go to the
Act on
totals
the
for
first
second
one and then go to the second one?
Yeah.
Okay, we can do that. Next on the agenda tonight is community solar definition. An ordinance to amend Kent County Code, Volume 2, Chapter 205 zoning, as amended by revising Article 2 definitions, subsection 205-6, definitions to delete the reference to regulation by the Public Service Commission in definition of community energy generating facility, and add the maximum size of 50 acres. We had that explained pretty well last week. And is there any questions on this before we go to the motions? If not, I'd entertain a motion. Mr. Davis?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move the Regional Planning Commission recommend approval of ordinance LC 22-16, an ordinance amending Article 2 definitions, 205-6 definitions to delete the reference to regulation by the Public Service Commission in the definition of the community energy generating facility, and add a maximum of 50 acres, size of 50 acres. This revision will permit the development of community energy generating facilities within territory held by the Delaware Electric Co-op.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Sarah, call the commission.
Mr. Peterman?
Yes, to approve.
Mr. Sarvon?
Yes to approve.
Mrs. Karcher?
Yes.
Mr. Galvery?
Yes to approve.
Mr. Mills?
Yes, to approve.
Mr. Davis?
Yes to approve.
Mr. Jester?
Yes to approve.
So you have 7 yeas in favor of recommending approval of ordinance LC 2216.
Thank you, commissioners. I guess we can come to you now about the definitions of what I asked previous.
All right, the table you have in front of you simply shows how many acres total are within each of the zoning districts in question, the AC, the AR, and the BG. And then within those zoning districts, how much is inside the growth zone versus outside the growth zone. And then our GIS analyst sort of subtracted out all land that would effectively be out of play, either because it's an ag preservation or it's environmentally sensitive, and sort of put together how much acreage is left within each of those zoning districts. So you're looking at the percentages, at the end of the table, it's the percentages of each of those zoning districts available. In terms of what's been approved so far for community, because they're all small scale, I'd be surprised if we're, again, with approval, maybe 100 acres, maybe 150, and that's probably a large estimate. And the sum total is there are thousands of acres available for development. And what the ordinance proposes is a 1,600 acre limit in AC and AR. That is incredibly small compared to what's available.
I thank you for your explanation. Does anybody have any questions for Sarah on this before we move forth to our next?
Yeah, I do.
Go ahead, Paul.
I guess I didn't get all that. I couldn't hear you for one thing. The last segment, percentage solar out of available zone outside the GZ. What is a GC?
Growth zone.
Okay. What do these numbers on that line mean? Like 27.3. Can you explain that to me again? I didn't get it all.
That the last column is the percentage of solar available for solar out of or outside of the growth zone. It's the percentage of the zoning district available outside of the growth zone.
Okay, and of course that would include AC, AR, and BG. Is that correct?
It's each row. The first row is AC, the second row is AR, the third row is BG.
Okay, I got it now. Thank you.
Great.
Anybody else have any questions before we move on?
I'd just like to say something.
Mr. Gervy, you have a question?
Actually, just a comment. So on this item last week, if memory serves me correct, we did, when we were listening to everybody talk about this, I believe her last name is Nash. I can't remember her first name. She was speaking, and we had asked, or actually I had asked her, since she seemed to have her finger on the pulse of the ag community, many of who were sitting in the audience, of what they felt about this. And her response, if memory serves me correct, is that although they didn't think that it was perfect, they had worked long and hard on this, and they felt pretty good about it, and they were willing to accept this. As a matter of fact, the one gentleman who usually comes here and has something not nice to say about just about everything said that he even accepted it. The only issue that they had issue with was the 1,600 acres, and we at one point had a maximum of 800 acres for AC. And I had asked Sarah at that time that based on this, that theoretically all 1,600 acres could come from AC. And she said that it could. And that seemed to be a stumbling block with the audience as well, the ag community. So I think we're here talking about this split here because of that, where we're trying to make sure that what we originally had of 800 acre maximum for AC doesn't actually have the potential to go up to 1,600.
Denise, you have a question?
All right, I'm not sure that I got everything that Mr. Garvey just said, but
We're splitting it
what's
right
being
now.
proposed now, it's saying 800 for each. I guess I have, that's one of my questions, is I think what we discussed was a maximum of 800 for AC. And then, so theoretically, if we don't want any more than 800 in AC, but they only come up to 700, couldn't AR have the remainder? Or is that
That's
just too complicated?
creating a certain amount of complexity that perhaps is not necessary.
Okay.
The existing ordinance today limits community solar to 800 acres outside the growth zone only. There is no limit inside the growth zone. There is no limit in AR. What the draft ordinance does is limit AC and AR throughout the entire county, so everything that is green on that map, to 1,600 acres total.
My original question was, the solar facilities that already exist, are they grandfathered from that 1,600?
That which is approved, we can't apply a new ordinance to.
So in other words, we would be saying 1,600
From the day it's approved.
from the day it's approved. Okay, thank you.
I think one point we didn't see is the farmers that were representative here in the phone calls that I've got, these are people renting land. You're hearing the people that are renting. You've heard tonight about people that own land, the solars that's being proposed, and like you heard Mr. Killen talk about to Mr. Mills, there is an aspect of the farming community that supports the solar. And because these renters are the ones that are disgruntled because they're losing land to higher priced solar energy farms. So you got to understand what you're looking at is half the glass when it's half full or half empty. So when you have to come up with quotas and things like that, I've never been a supporter of quotas because it puts undue hardships even on the planning department. You know, if they get down and say we're down, if we pass this tonight, this is just my opinion, and I'm not going to say which way I'm going to go when the motion goes, but you understand if we get down and we pass this and we get down to, say, 1,580 acres and there's 1,600 allowed, if a farmer wants to come in with a 24-acre block, he can't do it. And probably it won't be cost effective for that solar people to build that. because that they need so many acres to be able to develop to make that solar array work. So when you keep in mind of how you vote tonight, make sure you're not only, you heard quite a bit of discussion from the farmers that rent land, but you didn't hear all the farmer base of ones that own land. So there is a possibility of those having different opinions than what you have heard. So just keep that in mind. I will. I'm going to read the ordinance in. Before then, we can take more discussion. Okay. Next on the agenda tonight is LC 22-12, solar facilities. An ordinance to amend Kent County Code, Volume 2, Chapter 205 zoning, as amended by revising Article 5, Agriculture Conservation District, subsection 205-48, conditional uses. Article 6, Agriculture Residential District, subsection 205-64, conditional uses. Article 21, conditional uses, subsection 205-363.1, utility solar facility. Article 21, conditional uses, subsection 205-365, table of condition uses, and Article 26A to eliminate, supplemental regulations, subsection 205-397-9, community energy generating facility, in order to eliminate utility solar facility as a conditional use in the agriculture conservation agriculture residential zoning districts. Establish a limit of one community energy generating facility per parcel, and establish an expiration date for approved community energy generating facility projects. It's now been read in. Now we can take questions on this particular ordinance. Anybody have a question? Mr. Servon?
I just have a comment that I'd like to, I'm going to actually read it. All right, I have a few thoughts I'd like to share about the proposed ordinance LC 22-12. I was surprised and a little disappointed that this proposed ordinance suggesting changes to new, recently approved solar facility ordinances requires adoption of all of the additional amendments, or none at all. While I'm in support of some of the recommended amendments, this limitation of choice leaves me with little choice but to not support this ordinance. It seems apparent to me that this change in current ordinances to eliminate utility solar facilities may be beneficial to some landowners, but not to enough landowners.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else have comments? Mr. Davis?
I just want to make sure I understand this. The discussion about the 800 versus the 16, first of all, you can only allow community solar panels. You can't put no commercial. So if you only allow 50 acres, there's a lot of ground there. That's a lot of community solar panels we put in the county. So the argument that some people may not get in, I don't know if I really would agree with that, because you're only allowed to have 50 acres for community solar, and you multiply that time the amount that's in the county, there's ample room for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else have any comments before we get into this motion? If not, I would ask that, is there somebody that would like to make a motion? Go ahead, Mr. Davis.
Okay, this is LC 22-12, right? Okay. Mr. Chairman, I move that the Regional Planning Commission recommend approval of ordinance LC 22-12, an ordinance revising Article 5, Agricultural Conservation District 205-48, conditional use, Article B1, Agricultural Residential District 205-64, conditional use, and Article 11, conditional use, 205-363.1, utility solar facility, Article 11, that'll be 21, conditional use, 205-365, table of conditional uses in Article XXVIA, Supplemental Regulations 205-397.9, Community Energy Generating Facility in order to eliminate utility solar facility as a conditional use in agricultural conservation and agricultural residential zoning districts. Establish a limit of one community energy generating facility per parcel and establish an expiration date for approved community energy generating facility projects. And I further recommend the following amendment. Is this the one you wanted in there? Was the amendment in there? Got Amendment 1.
He has a question?
Amendment 1, if you keep reading, is what was requested, the split of the 1,600 into 800 per zoning district.
So that should be included in this.
It must be included if you want levy court to consider it.
Thank you. Amendment 1, amend LC 22-12, Section 6, 205-397.9 by revising item 3 to delete the following bracketed language shown with strike-through marks and adding the following underlined language.
I have a motion. Do I have a second? Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry. Beat me too. I guess he just reads the parts that's not pushed out, correct?
Number 3, no more than 800 acres each shall be dedicated to community solar energy generating facilities in the AC agricultural conservation and AR agricultural residential districts. The provisions shall apply to all community solar energy generating facilities submitted for review after the effective date of this ordinance. And I think that's it.
I think that's it. I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Call the commission.
Mr. Peterman?
Yes.
Mr. Servon?
No.
Mrs. Karcher?
I'm voting yes because I know how long this has taken, and I'm happy that there was so much discussion and agreement too. But I'm voting yes because there can always be new amendments.
Mr. Galbraith?
Yes to approve.
Mr. Mills?
Yes to approve.
Mr. Davis?
Yes to approve.
Mr. Jester?
No, because I think it limits too much. And when you're limited down to 1,600 acres, 800 each, I just don't, I don't like anything like that when you put that in place, and I'm voting no.
So you have 5 yeas, 2 nays in favor of recommending approval with amendments of Ordinance LC 2212.
Thank you, Commissioners. I know you sent us in a packet about the Knollwood with the owners and all. Do I need to go through all that, or can I just read what's on the agenda sheet?
I think what's on the agenda is perfectly fine. This is simply a final plan approval.
Okay. Okay, we're going down to SL-20-02, Knollwood. Request for final plan approval for the 289 major subdivision located inside the growth zone overlay district. Mr. Tolliver was here and gave us great explanation. It is a large development, and they're doing a lot of things in that area to improve that particular development. Does any commissioners have any questions? If not, entertain a motion. Mr. Peterman, go ahead, please.
SL 20-02, I move that the Regional Planning Commission grant final plan approval to SL 20-02 Knollwood, including the record plot, landscape plans, and open space improvement. This is based on the staff memo dated September 8, 2022, the fact that all requirements and recommendations have been incorporated into the plan and all letters of no objections have been submitted.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Call the commission.
Mr. Peterman?
Yes to approve.
Mr. Servon?
Yes.
Mrs. Karcher?
Yes.
Mr. Galvary?
Yes to approve.
Mr. Mills?
Yes to approve.
Mr. Davis?
Yes to approve.
Mr. Jester?
Yes to approve.
So you have 7 yeas in favor of granting final plan approval to SL 2002.
Thank you, and good luck with your project. We're down into the final application for tonight. It's SLV-22-15, RCCG Father's House Assembly. It's actually applicant owner of Redeemed Christian Church of God, Father's House Assembly, care of Vincent Ikawagu. Once again, I apologize. 310 Pebble Drive, Canton, Wyoming, Delaware, 19934. It's zoned RS2. We've already gone through all the parameters of this, and tonight's meeting is just about the waiver for the sidewalk, which they're asking not to build. So, sir, come up and straighten me out on pronouncing your name. I know I did the best I tried to before.
You got it right, sir. You did.
Do we have to do anything with him, Craig? Or do we have to swear him in or nothing?
No, it's not a public hearing.
Very good. Sir, what are you applying for tonight?
We are approved in 2000.
Can you pull the microphone down to your mouth, please?
Yes,
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We were approved in 2019 to refurbish an abandoned property there that was almost an eyesore at the corner for a very long time. I did send a picture of what we have done with the property. We started rebuilding within the time that we had this COVID situation, where all the building materials increased by 200%, and we've been able to almost get into the completion. But one thing that got our attention that has become a very big hardship is that there is a requirement there that we put a walkway, a sidewalk on the side of State Street, and then the county did not say anything about Highview Avenue. So Highview Avenue is mostly residential, and the State Street side is mixed, both residential and commercial. It's mostly residential. The only commercial thing that is there is just the Wolf Creek. I sent pictures to Mr. Berry for us to really, if you look at what we have, you see those trees. That has been staple beauty in that area. Very beautiful, beautifully done, very nice, and it's there for a purpose. It beautifies the street, and it also cuts off drivers from being distracted by whatever that is going inside the compound. So this requirement is calling for those beautiful trees to be removed. All the other properties that we had, we've always been asked to plant trees and not to remove trees. Those ones, they are requiring that potentially we might have to remove all those beautiful trees. And one of the biggest issue, and I can see the recommendation here, but one of the biggest issue that we are really having a very major hardship in terms of cost. The total is 600 feet by 42 inches of cement, 600 feet. The best quote that we have received is close to $32,000 after all the effort that we put in. So this particular issue may eventually leave all the building and all the construction we have done to just sit there because we are not able to build these sidewalks. We are not a company. Our church is just about 5 families that is trying to do this feat to beautify that place and serve the community. this has become a very major hardship. It's a major undertaking, and we've appealed to the highway department, DOT. I'm not against beautifying or making it a rule that we put sidewalks on the street, but I believe if the state wants to do that, the state has the capacity to do that. But asking the five family member church of our size to engage in putting a sidewalk is really a disservice to the whole community for that building to sit there. Moreover, if they could have showed the pictures I sent them a couple of pictures. After you see what Wolf Creek did, which was a major company that did that, after Wolf Creek, the next thing is a house. The next thing is a residential house. There's actually is a sidewalk going to nowhere. Even Wolf Creek built it, nobody uses it. And there is the guy next to us is building up his house. It's purely residential. If the sidewalk continues, it will go right in front of his house. It will go right in front of his house. If you look at where we stop, if you go forward, if you come south, you'll be right at the middle of the compound of another residential property. On the other side, on the southern side of State Street, they're all residential. There is no sidewalk. Across from us, that has commercial, and even another big church, bigger church than ours, there are no sidewalks. So I served for 25 years as a public utility analyst. I was a senior regulatory analyst with the Public Service Commission. We interpreted the state rules and laws, but it was applied on a case-by-case basis. This paintbrush, that is a regulation. I was a public utility regulator for 25 years with the state before I retired. This is just putting a paintbrush that is really creating major hardship. Major hardship. It's a major hardship. So that's why we have come today, that the rules that have been set, and the commissioners have been appointed to apply those rules, to maintain those rules, but to look at what we have or what potentially could be such a hardship to stop us from utilizing that space to serve the neighborhoods, to serve the less disadvantaged that we want to reach as a church is a major issue. That's why we came back. I don't know how much luck that we have or how much grace that we have, since we are pastors, say grace of God, but we decided to come to appeal to the commissioners. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. One question, sir. Are they asking to eliminate the sidewalk on State Street and Highview, or just the part on State Street?
Our condition or our code requirement only applies to State Street. Highview comes from DelDOT, not the county.
So in other words, whether we do or don't do this would still mean that they'd have to go through other facets to eliminate the other sidewalk.
I mean, the Planning Commission could waive the sidewalk requirement along State Street. The applicant would still have to get DelDOT to concur both with State Street and with Highview Avenue. He may have leverage walking into DelDOT if he's got a waiver from the county.
Denise, I think you have a question for staff.
I can't tell by looking at the plans. Do those trees or bushes, whatever they are, have to come down? I got the feeling they didn't have to.
I don't believe the original site plan showed that all the trees had to come down. There should be room in the right-of-way to install the sidewalk.
Okay, that's what I thought. Now, a question. If the church across the street or any of those properties that we can see that are on South State Street, if they wanted to make some major improvement, they would have to do the sidewalk. Am I correct?
The trigger is redevelopment. It's when a site plan is required. At that point, it triggers all of the design criteria in Chapter 187.
So even, for example, if the church across the street wanted to change their parking area?
It would depend on whether a site plan is triggered. So it may not hit the threshold. It would depend on what they're doing.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Davis?
Okay, if I'm looking at this correctly, I don't see any sidewalks by the adjoining properties. Am I looking at this correctly?
There's none on the adjacent properties. There is some sidewalk in the vicinity, but not on adjacent properties.
Well, you know, I think we need more churches, and I understand what he's saying. You're talking about a major expense, and I don't think this is right, because if the neighbor next door were to get the zoning he got, are you going to make them do the same thing?
Any land development requiring a site plan that is on a major road, the code requires installation of sidewalk.
It requires, if it was mandatory, we wouldn't be here voting on it as a waiver.
It is
And I wanna-
mandatory. The Planning Commission can waive the requirements of Chapter 187. That is what is in front of you tonight.
Yeah, I don't think this is right to make them put that sidewalk up there. Everybody vote the way they want, but I had concerns with me about it. I remember when this zoning came in, and, well, I'll just leave it at that. Everybody vote their conscience. Thank you.
Commissioner Gerby?
Question, I guess, for staff. I know in Little Creek, we always have this issue about where the sidewalk ends, because it doesn't go all the way to the end of the town. The people that are in the area where the sidewalk is not, have, for as long as they can remember, enjoyed all that frontage that actually doesn't belong to them if you were to put all the easements in place. And then the people that are right next to them that happen to have where the sidewalk is, has, well, I guess what we're proposing here. So when I look at it, I'm thinking of my town, and I'm just wondering about the property adjacent to it and those down there that your comment is that it's a sidewalk that will go to nowhere. We have a sidewalk that goes to nowhere in our town on both sides of the street. So it would just basically stop at the end of that property, and unless the adjacent property was to do some sort of major development, that's the way it would stand. Is that correct?
Yes, the trigger is redevelopment of a site, or DelDOT comes in and starts installing sidewalk in their own right-of-way. Those are the two options.
Okay. I don't think they would mind if DelDOT came in and did it. It's the expense that they're going to be incurring that seems to be prohibitive. Okay, thank you.
I'll make
Servon, I think, excuse me, Mr. Servon was next.
Yes, I have a question. So is the county requirement just for frontage?
Frontage on major roads.
So I mean, front of the lot, which faces,
No, it's whatever is along a roadway. If Highview Avenue were also a major road, we'd require a sidewalk there. It's not. State Street is. So the code requires sidewalk there.
but not in the front of the property, where the driveway is. and the-
Frontage is along the road. So it is along any road, that is frontage. The property fronts on two roads. It fronts on Highview and it fronts on State Street.
And so is it both required then? No.
We only require sidewalks on major roads. Roads have different classifications.
Right.
State Street counts as a major road. Highview Avenue does not.
See, DelDOT has classified all roadways, including minor collectors, major collectors, local roads, and they have to go through that process with DelDOT. That's the way it was when I worked there, too. Are you okay?
I understand, but I don't agree.
Okay.
I mean, I can see
Mr. Mills?
use of it.
I'll give Denise a break and I'll make this a little short motion.
Well, we still got questions. Hold on.
Is pavement sidewalk the only option?
What do you mean by pavement? Do you mean concrete or do you
I
mean
do.
asphalt or do you mean something else?
I mean concrete. Is that the only option?
That would be in the purview of DelDOT. If it were a multi-use path, the county would certainly have no objection to that. The code is silent in terms of material, but it's in DelDOT's right of way. They get to make that call.
So you're saying that we could say, oh, you can just use the multimodal method, but it has to go to DelDOT first, and they're going to say,
I don't know what DelDOT will say. Certainly, DelDOT installs its own multimodal paths throughout the state. So I don't know that DelDOT would object to it effectively being an asphalt path rather than concrete.
I'm presuming that that would be significantly cheaper.
I haven't priced it. It is typically, yes, much cheaper than concrete.
Okay, okay. I mean, as much as I want to say, give the waiver, this is a busy road. It's a worrisome road to me when the few times that I have to drive down it every year. Okay, all right, thank you.
Yeah, but people be crossing the street in order to get on the sidewalk. I mean, that's like an attractive nuisance. You put one little strip of sidewalk on State Street.
Mr. Peterman, do you have a question before we move on?
Yes, thank you, sir. On the alternative motion, if we approve that, does DelDOT still have the right to tell them to put in the sidewalk?
Yes,
Okay.
but I
So
suspect
if we approve it, then we leave it up to DelDOT.
you would leave it up to DelDOT, yes.
That's good.
Is there any more questions before we get to the motion? No more questions? Mr. Mills, you want to do the motion?
I move that the Regional Planning Commission approve application SLV-22-15, a waiver from 187-60.A, requiring the installation of the frontage sidewalk, installation of the sidewalk, place an undue burden on the property owner.
Second motion.
I have a motion and a second. Sarah, call the commission.
Mr. Peterman?
Yes, to approve.
Mr. Servon?
I'm sorry, I was shuffling papers. It's to approve the waiver.
I'm approving it.
I vote yes.
Mrs. Karcher?
Yes.
Mr. Galvary?
Yes to approve.
Mr. Mills?
Yes to approve.
Mr. Davis?
Yes to approve.
Mr. Jester?
Yes to approve.
So you have 7 yeas in favor of approving the waiver request, SLV 2215.
Okay, before we gavel this one, I think Denise has a comment.
Sarah, I would really appreciate it if you could explain to the pastor that DelDOT now could turn around and...
Our staff already has, but we can continue that conversation.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and good luck with not doing your project.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. God bless you.
I'm now down to public comment. Only seeing 2 public here. I think they probably want to go home just like we do. So, seeing no public, is anybody on the, I didn't even ask tonight about on there, but nobody's been on the phone. Very good. Commission comments? Anybody else on the commission? Mr. Davis?
I just want to say I want to thank Commissioner Cartledge for reading both of those long, motions. I didn't see too many people pop up, and I was one of them. But you did a great job, Denise, and they were long. Thank you.
I'm telling you, do not have a hard candy in your mouth while you're reading that, because...
I got some water left down there if you need any more water.
I thought she would have knew it by heart by the time the third one got there, so I don't
I
know.
think you need a finger prosthetic, though, also.
Okay, we're down to adjournment. I entertain a motion to adjourn.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion and second. Call the commission.
Mr. Peterman?
Yes, to adjourn.
Mr. Servon?
Yes to adjourn.
Mrs. Karcher?
Yes.
Mr. Galvary?
Yes.
Mr. Mills?
Yes to adjourn.
Mr. Davis?
Yes, to adjourn.
Mr. Jester?
Yes to adjourn, and thank you all for coming.